And I am the chair for the Latino Leadership Network Business Resource Group. And I am sorry I cannot be there with you today, but I'm going to share a Hispanic Heritage Month presentation with you today. I hope that it is still engaging and of value to you. So to get started, just amongst yourselves, share a food that connects you to your culture and a memory connected to that food. And you can pause this video if you want to take a minute for your team to do this activity. It's always a fun way to connect and to kick off Hispanic Heritage Month if your heritage happens to be Hispanic and you share a food that's connected to your culture. So I do want to share a little bit about Latino Leadership Network. We are a business resource group that strives to provide Latinos and their allies and state government a place where they feel a sense of community and learn new things that help them in their profession. And our goal is to connect and inspire, and that power of connection can invest, inspire, and serve. And we welcome all allies as well. I love the definition that we use for Latine. We're going to go over some terms today, but the first term I'd like to go over is Latine. Latine individuals represent communities that span from the North, Central, South American continents and Caribbean islands that were colonized by the Spanish Empire. Our heritage not only reflects the Spanish colonizers, but equally reflects the indigenous heritage and traditions of the people who existed prior to colonization and continue to exist. This heritage is inextricably connected with the Black community through our survival and flourishing despite these systems, and our identities are varied and based on family histories, traditions, and shared experiences. We are not a monolith. As our self-understanding and discovery grow, we expect that our definitions and appreciation of identities will also grow and progress. I love our definition of Latine. Our theme for Hispanic Heritage Month this year is Hasta la Raíz. Doesn't literally translate very well, but essentially means we want to go back to our roots, honoring our ancestors by remembering our roots. And the reason that Hispanic Heritage Month, or Mes de la Herencia Hispana, is from September 15th through October 15th is because of the many Independence Days that are celebrated in Latin American countries from Costa Rica, El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, Mexico, and Chile. And I love the way that some words sound better in Spanish. Herencia, when you translate heritage, it translates to herencia, but when you translate it back, herencia really brings to mind inheritance. So a return to our roots in recognizing the inheritance that our ancestors have left with us. So I said we were going to talk about some terms. The first term is, what is the difference between Latino and Hispanic? They seem to be used interchangeably. Well, some countries are Latin countries, while some countries are Hispanic countries, and some countries are both. Latino is connected to a land. They're countries connected to Latin America and the Caribbean island, the geography. And so you'll see that Brazil is a Latin country. But Brazil is not a Hispanic country, because on the right, you'll see that Hispanic is attached to the language. Countries that speak Spanish, and they speak Spanish because they were colonized by Spain. And so Brazil was not colonized by Spain. They were colonized by Portugal. So they speak Portuguese. So they are a Latin country, but not a Hispanic country. While the countries in the middle are both. They speak Spanish as their dominant language, and they happen to also geographically be in Latin America, which would include Argentina, Chile, Mexico, Honduras, and all of the ones that you see in the center. Another term I want to clarify is America. We like to say, this is America, and I'm an American. But I think that is kind of, I don't know, self-centered maybe is the right way to say it, because we are not the only Americans. America consists of North America, Central America, South America, and Latin America. So this is America is what you see here in this map, excluding Spain, which is in the yellow. And the reason they're colored is just to show how they were colonized. And the colonization is also attached to a language. So, fun fact, the first colonized language to reach the Americas was actually Spanish, not English, because it was Spain. And so the first language is Spanish, and also all of the red is identified as colonized by Spain. So technically, look at the US. We were originally predominantly a Spanish-speaking country. We won't get into that today. I'll talk about language a little bit later. Another term is ethnicity. So let me go back one. So when we talk about countries, or maybe I'm getting ahead of myself. I don't know that I define nationality here because I think I took out that slide. So nationality is connected to birth, citizenship, what's on your passport, what's on your birth certificate. So my nationality is a U.S. citizen. Again, America is not my nationality. USA or U.S. citizen is my nationality. When we go to ethnicity, that's when you will hear people, even though they were born in the U.S., where they will refer to themselves as Mexican, Mexican American. I refer to my ethnicity or heritage as Chicana because it's even more specific. And some people will identify themselves rather than Latino or Hispanic, firstly, with their nationality. I'm Honduran. I'm Ecuadorian. I'm Mexican. And then with their ethnicity, especially if it doesn't match their nationality, where again, my nationality is U.S. citizen, but my ethnicity is Mexican, Mexican American, or Chicana, where ethnicity divides people into social groups based around cultural characteristics such as language, values, heritage, history, and ancestral geography. I do not need to erase or deny my ethnicity just because of my nationality. And some more connection to that is that many of us have a long history, especially if you are Hispanic or Latino, of being on this land. If you are indigenous to this land or Latino, Hispanic, Mexican American, Tejano, or Chicano, you really have a connection to this land because we have been here since the colonization of, even before the colonization of Spain. And all of this land down in that you see here in the green actually was Mexico before it was given or stolen from by us in the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. And the reason that I say given or stolen is because we did not honor the agreements in that treaty, much like many treaties before that. We were promised 3 promises: to keep our property rights, to keep our political, social, and economic rights, and citizenship, U.S. citizenship for all landowners of this land that was owned by Mexicans and indigenous peoples from Mexico. And so you'll see again that this was all because it belonged to Mexico, Spanish-speaking land, and why so many of us even do not identify as immigrants because we've always been here. And the border we never crossed the border crossed us. And so we're, even as a community, are trying to connect with our indigenous roots because our ancestors have always been here. So again, you'll hear these terms used interchangeably. And speaking of indigenous, and you heard it in our definition as well, is that the definition of indigenous is people inhabiting or existing in a land from the earliest times or from before the arrival of the colonists. And this is the first year that I've gone to the Native Land website. I've gone to it before to help people identify the land, the indigenous land that they are sitting on. I sit on the land of the Yakama Nation, but also using this to identify the lands of our ancestors and what indigenous people groups were on those lands, because I want to know my indigenous history as well. And so that would be it. Maybe next year I'll do a little lunch and learn on what I found out. But feel connected to our indigenous roots, even though it was colonization erased many of our traditions and our original indigenous languages. Not all of them, because there's still hundreds of them that exist in Latin America of indigenous languages, but I don't know what my indigenous language was. But can't talk about our history without talking about our indigenous ancestors and indigenous history and indigenous blood that we still carry, as well as our Afro-Latinidad, because enslavement was not limited to North America. It was also throughout all of the Americas. We, Hispanic, Latino, I'll talk about this later, is not a race, because we are so many mixed ethnicities and historically different nationalities, and different tribes even. But we want to honor our Afro-Latinidad, because sometimes when you think of Latino or Hispanic, you might think of somebody with my shade of melanin, but we come in all shades because of our history and our Afro-Latinidad history, our indigenous history, and all of that blood that we carry as a people. And originally, because of who settled here and our indigenous roots and the history of enslavement, when the Spaniards came and colonized the Americas, similar to what was happening in North America, they formed a caste system, this hierarchy of people, and they had a name for every single mix of peoples. And so to acknowledge that that's part of our history as well, and still continues today in the form of colorism and prejudice against people because of the shade of their skin. And won't get into this very much, but just this is a picture of some of the castes. Even though only 16 are named here, it got to 22, and then the mix was so much that they stopped counting and stopped classifying so many. But there was a hierarchy with the Spaniard, the full-bred or full-blooded Spaniard at the top, and the indigenous and African at the bottom, and everything else in between. So similar to the caste system in North America, we invented race. And I say invented because it was actually codified into our laws. And in the Homestead Act, land was given only to white citizens. Only white citizens could own land, because only white people could be citizens, and only citizens could own land. So even during enslavement, slavery and enslavement, or slavery, was abolished, they did not become citizens until 1868, and were promised the 40 acres and a mule, but that was never given. So race actually became part of our laws in the US. And so race divides people into social groups based on physical characteristics such as skin color, similar to the caste system. And why isn't Latino or Hispanic a race, you may be asking? Why is it so confusing to fill out forms when there is no race as Latino or Hispanic? And why are Latinos and Hispanics identifying as white maybe you ask? Because Latino Hispanic is not a race, because back in 1930, the US Census added Mexican as a race. And I think Mexico was also involved. We're involved in saying, no, Mexican is not a race. For one, it went back historically to the Treaty of Guadalupe, where only white people could own land. So if only white people could own land and we were promised citizenship, then we needed to recognize that we were white so that we could be seen as citizens and own land. But that never happened. We were never socially accepted as white, and hence wanted to be put as Mexican on the census. But the other reason why we fought against it was what was happening in 1930s. The very first mass deportation, or what they called Mexican repatriation. A long history of wanting our labor, but not wanting our people. This was the very first enactment of mass deportation. And so then after that, the census never included Mexican. And it wasn't until the 80s where it started being added as an ethnicity option. So they had race, and then after race, when we didn't find it there, or say I selected other, then you would have an ethnicity option of Spanish or Hispanic origin. And still, even then, connecting Spanish and Hispanic to the colonizer of Spain and the language of Spanish. So Hispanic and Latino were never terms that were created by our community. So again, most people will refer to them by their nationality or ethnicity rather than even Latino or Hispanic. But we use those terms interchangeably because we didn't invent either one of those terms. It was actually the French that came up with the term for Latin America for a whole other set of reasons. And so it wasn't until 2000 that they added under ethnicity and changed it to Hispanic, Latino, or Spanish origin, and then started specifying. And it wasn't until 2024 that the question was actually combined and now changed to race and ethnicity with one combined question, because we still could not choose which race, or we came in or selected multiple races. And now what you'll see very often is white, not of Hispanic origin, or white and Latino. So long history about why we are not considered a race. And had to throw in just a little bit because of the state of our country right now, giving some context and history to that. I already mentioned that in the 1930s, there was the first mass deportation. And so this just is a picture of a news article where that first exclusion happened. And we have a history of exclusion in our immigration system, from the Chinese exclusion to Japanese internment, to adding literacy requirements to try to keep people out, to the Bracero program to bring workers but not provide a pathway to citizenship, temporary workers, which ended up being exploited. Many of them were sent home without even getting paid, but also the first ones that started to settle in the U.S., but without documentation, because Bracero program was a temporary program, again, because they wanted our labor, but they didn't want us. And continuing through that U.S. history is then the second mass deportation that happened in the 50s. So now we've had people settling because of the Bracero program, and now people are complaining again. The first time in the 30s, it was because of the Depression that people were complaining that Mexicans were taking their jobs, and now in the 50s, they're again complaining that Mexicans are taking their jobs, and had the second mass deportation, which this one was referred to in the negative derogatory terms of Operation Wetback, where the deportation included the mass deportation of U.S. citizens as well. And during the Bracero program and during that time of migration, many people started settling in the Pacific Northwest. So 20% of those that immigrated or migrated came to settle in Idaho, Washington, predominantly. And started, these are pictures from Eastern Washington. And starting to see migrants. So not so much a conversation about immigration as much as migration, because many of these families did not actually come from Mexico. Many of these families were coming from Texas and California and Arizona, the Southwest. Migrating seasonally. Those of you who work for DSHS, ESA, CSD are used to some terms like seasonal farm work, migrant farm work. These families would migrate seasonally for the work and then return to California or Arizona or Texas. But many of those families started settling here in Eastern Washington and also started just the hierarchy of racism as well, or how people were seen differently, that there was two tiers of farm workers. There was the white laborer, which was the fruit packer, which was still above the Mexican and Mexican American farm worker that was out in the fields, which is my history, but my family settled in Idaho. And so we had such an impact on agriculture that even during the Bracero program, the Yakima Chamber of Commerce wrote to Mexico's president to thank him for the braceros that came to work in the Yakima Valley because they aided in harvesting the food grown in this area. So we have contributed, talking about contributions, to specifically Washington and Eastern Washington, is the contributions of the Hispanic families that started settling, not only the braceros, but after the braceros, the families that stayed. During the 50s, many of the white families that were in Eastern Washington started moving to Western Washington for other industries such as shipbuilding and aircraft, while the Mexican or Tejano families established themselves in the Yakima Valley. And so here you'll see how the Ranchito was one of the first restaurants to open with Mexican food, started getting involved or connected to our community. Here is, Sunshine Days. And then here's Herminia Mendez, honoring her, not because we have the same name, or she's my tocaya, as we would say in Spanish, but because she actually was an entrepreneur and had dance halls. I mean, this woman was amazing. I never met her, but I know her son before he passed away, and his children went to school with our kids. She was the first Spanish radio, and she had her own Spanish music show on KREW. And then after that, that was even before the Radio Cadena days. That's in Granger, and was the very first Spanish public radio in the country. So started settling so much that impacted the state of Washington's population and demographics. And this is actually a picture of the census from the 2020, where it shows in green those counties that are predominantly Hispanic in the U.S. And of course, as expected in the Southwest, Texas, Arizona, California. But look at up here. The only 3 green counties in all of northern U.S. Is in Washington State. Yakima, Adams, and Franklin County. So something about this area that created a sense of community enough for Hispanic Latine families to establish themselves and stay and stop migrating back to their home states of Texas, California, and Arizona, and actually decided to stay. That didn't even happen in Idaho. My mom is still in Idaho, but not enough families stayed for that to happen there. But it did happen here. And you can see it as soon as you cross into Eastern Washington today, the Hispanic Latine influence, and actually living in some counties that are now predominantly Hispanic. And here's just a map of Washington, and just the darker the hue here is just the higher percentage of Latinos in these counties that have now spread beyond Eastern Washington. Again, because you can see that it's connected to agriculture, where the agricultural rural areas is what attracted a lot of these families, and that is where they've decided to stay. And just recognizing that our population, we're growing. And unlike the narrative that has is happening in our country right now, of criminalizing the way that we look and the way that we speak, 81% of U.S. Hispanics are actually U.S. citizens, even though we try to give that the narrative is that most of us are undocumented or immigrants. 80% are U.S. citizens. We are younger than the national average and getting educated more and more every day. 1 out of 5 Hispanics have bachelor's degrees, and our average median age is 29.5 years compared to the overall US, which is 37.8, and of US born, 21 years. So very, very young. So if you'd like to learn more about Hispanic or Latino history, there's so many books out there. Please read, please listen to our stories created by us, for us, and educate yourself on the real history and the real narratives. I'd like to end our time before I share just some events. I know I went a little over 15 minutes, so with a poem that I wrote for the Lunch and Learn that I did last week. And most of you are familiar with the format, but this is a brand new one that I created and go to our Latino Leadership Network YouTube page, and you can see my full Lunch and Learn on story. And so ending it to this today with my story of where I'm from. I am from no-name cereal and only knowing secondhand or homemade clothes. And I am from homemade flour tortillas and frijoles de loya. I am from a one-room labor camp filled with cousins to play with and Casey Kasem's Top 40 in my pink bedroom. I am from nopales, figs, and pomegranate trees whose fruit grew wild at my abuelita's. I am from accordions and tambourines from Martinez Garcia and Garza Casiano. I am from conjuntos and coritos and living room full of música and Dios te bendiga, hermana. I am from Guadalupe, Juanita, and Minerva, from burritos, fideo, and TV dinners. From Jesus El Gallito Casiano, whose records live on at the Smithsonian, and resilient women who never received their flowers. I am from interpreting for my mom to seeing her fly her own wings. I am from all those moments and now back with pride at the secondhand store, sewing and upcycling, teaching my grandchildren where I am from. So thank you. Please continue to attend our Hispanic Heritage Month events. The recordings for the first 2 events are already on our YouTube channel. This Thursday, Nancy Aguilar, which is today, and then Abel Rocha on October 2nd is our very first Lunch and Learn that will be completely in Spanish. Come learn some Spanish and see how much you can pick up on. And Decolonizing Our Identity on the 9th, and Culturally Aligned Health Support on the 16th, and a Dia de los Muertos panel on the 23rd, and the Dolores Huerta Foundation is coming to our October general meeting. If you are in the Olympia area, our in-person event is in partnership with the City of Olympia and Lula Fest, happening this Saturday from 1 to 8 in downtown Olympia. So much music. Please attend if you are in the area. You can find links to all of these events and how to register at our website at cha.wa.gov. cha.wa.gov, and then just click on Latino Leadership Network, and all of our links can be found there, as well as our links for our general meetings and to register for the remaining Lunch and Learns, and you can find us on all our social media pages. Thank you, and happy Hispanic Heritage Month, Mes de Herencia Hispana.